Every team could use more depth, and today we've got Thomas Govain joining us to look at 5 free agent position players that the Cardinals could sign for 2025.
You are Locked On Cardinals, your daily St. Louis Cardinals podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Cardinals fans. I'm JD Hafford, and I'm your host for Locked On Cardinals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your team every day. You can follow me on Twitter X at JD Sports Radio. You can also follow the podcast at LO_Cardinals. I do want to thank those of you who make Locked On Cardinals your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. We're also available on YouTube. Like, subscribe, and comment. Don't forget to hit that notification button so you know when the new episodes are posted. This is a show serving Cardinal Nation and giving the best fans in baseball all of the info about the birds on the bat. Today's episode brought to you by FanDuel. For big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel. New customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed. Win or lose, visit FanDuel.com to get started. All right, I hope everyone had a solid weekend. We get back to the grind that is Cardinal baseball today, and to help us get through all of the massive amounts of transactions and news is our friend Thomas Govain from RedwoodRants.com. Happy Monday, man. How are you?
Good. Good to be back with you, JD.
Good to have you back. The St. Louis Cardinals, I don't know if you've noticed, Thomas, but they have been a whirlwind of activity and excitement this offseason. Probably the most exciting team in Major League Baseball at the moment. It's been really tough to keep up. Obviously, we're joking a little bit here because the Cardinals have done almost nothing. There's been a couple of things here and there thus far, but here we are a week out from the annual Cardinals winter warm-up, which is taking place at Busch Stadium and at Ballpark Village coming up on the 18th through the 20th. I'm kind of curious. I don't know about you, but I'm curious what the attendance is going to be like. We saw what attendance was just at the stadium in general for actual games last year and what it might be like for the winter warm-up this year, considering the lack of movement on the roster, the direction the team is going into heading into 2025, lack of star power that the team possesses in general. I mean, obviously, you're going to have your diehards that are going to show up and come out and support. I would be there if I didn't have any prior engagements, but I've already committed to some things, so I can't go. But for the average fan, Thomas, there's no Yachty, there's no Albert, there's no Waino. Where's the excitement that would entice people to come down to be a part of winter warm-up this year?
They just added a whole bunch of free autographs, and John Mozeliak is on there. They're all sold out. I just checked the website, so you can't get any of the free ones anymore. I don't know. For me, I just like being in the stadium and around it. I won't be there either. I'm out of town, but I think it's cool just to have the opportunity to get that close with professional athletes and coaches and people within the organization. You get to go to the stadium and get tours of it. It's a pretty cool event for fans. I know it's not free, but there's still some stuff that you can do that are included just by showing up.
Getting to the clubhouse is a pretty cool thing to do. You get to go down there and take a tour in there and walk around inside. And last year when I was there, Ollie was actually down there taking pictures with people. So, I mean, you have a chance. If you want a picture with Ollie, maybe that's something you can get. Winter warm-up this year is going to be, it's more geared about the young guys. I mean, you do have some of the, you know, the famous guys from the Cardinals. Tony La Russa is supposed to be there, Ozzie Smith, Vince Coleman, but it's more about the young guys. Jordan Walker, Mason Wynn, Thomas Ajacey, Quinn Matthews, T. Kent's, Victor Scott. You mentioned some of these autograph sessions. Those are already sold out already. You're going to have guys like Sonny Gray and Ryan Helsley and other veterans who will be there outside of Nolan Arenado, who continues to be the subject of trade rumors. Now, the latest that we've heard on Nato is that Boston still remains in play. It seems like the best fit for everybody involved. But we've also heard the names of the Mariners and the Tigers have been brought up too. But, you know, with Alex Bregman still out there as a free agent, we're kind of at an impasse of sorts because they're trying to figure out where he's going to go first to decide who needs a third baseman still. So, and in the same way, we feel like that's kind of what Bregman's camp might be doing, is they're like waiting to find out who's going to go get Nato, and that way they can, you know, put the pressure on those other teams. But we've got pitchers and catchers reporting in about a month. So it's kind of a crappy position to be in. What are your thoughts on everything that's transpired with the Nolan Arenado situation thus far?
It's bizarre, and it feels like every single day that passes when Nato isn't traded, he's just going to be on the team, and he's going to start spring training with the Cardinals. He'll at least be there for the first half of the year. It's just weird that it seemed like there's been so many speed bumps and stops, but then it's accelerated here, and then we've stepped back. It's just a wild history, and I really wouldn't be surprised. I think it was Katie Wu talked about this recently. He's such a driven player, and he's going to find a chip for his shoulder regardless of where it comes from. I could totally see him starting the year with the Cardinals, being red hot for 4 or 5 months, and then we can ship him out at the trade deadline if we're not in contention. I think that's probably the most possible route at this point.
Gosh, that's such a bummer too, because I sincerely was hoping that they were going to get something done with Nato, not because I just want to get rid of him. That's not really the reason why. But if the team and the franchise really does want to turn the page and move on with things and actually do something during this reset, a trade really needs to happen, because right now they're basically running things back with a majority of the same guys who got them 83 wins last year, outside of, Goldie moving on, Gibson, Lynn. But for the most part, there just hasn't been much movement on the roster. Kittredge signed, but it's just like, it's for the most part, it's the same dudes. And it seems like we haven't been able, because it's weird because nobody wants to leave. Like, Contreras and Gray, these guys that they were thinking like, okay, you guys probably want to move on. No, they all wanted to stick around, and it kind of screwed this whole thing up a little bit. I saw a graphic yesterday. I want to throw this up on the screen for you guys who are watching on YouTube, and for you, Thomas. I don't know if you saw this from Brooksgate that showed which teams had cut the most payroll since last year. And the Cardinals, here we go. Boop. Take a look at that. Cardinals are the 4th most overall so far, behind the Mets, Braves, White Sox, and Marlins. Mets are the lowest right now at almost $78 million, despite signing Juan Soto, if you can believe that. Just still, it shows you how much money they were spending last year. I mean, they were like $350 million.
Verlander and Scherzer, yeah.
Yeah, Braves at 71, White Sox are at about 68, Marlins around 64. It's kind of funny to see those 4 names together, because you got the Mets and Braves, who are clearly trying to win World Series, and then you got the other 2 teams who are nowhere near winning a championship. And then you got the Cardinals coming in at 61 million, a majority of that being their choice to move on from Paul Goldschmidt and Kyle Gibson and Lance Lynn. Shedding money from Nato's deal would obviously help continue that trend, and if they do get a deal done, then they can move on and start putting money and time and effort into adding depth pieces for the team in 2025, which is where you come in, Thomas, because you put together a list of 5 position players that you think would be a good fit for this team next year. So before we get into the names, give them an idea of what kind of free agents you were looking at and thinking about that this team might be able to use next year.
Yeah, there's still guys like Alex Bregman and Pete Alonso out there who would be wonderful right-handed bats to add, but they're not realistic. My goal here was to find people who could play basically a utility role or center field to platoon with Michael Ciani. I think that's what John Mozeliak was hinting at, and Derek Gould was hinting at when they talked about these things. And so those are the types of guys I tried to find.
All right, so we're going to start with a familiar name to Cardinals fans, and it's a guy that obviously was a big fan favorite when he was in town, was traded at the deadline back in 2022, and has bounced around a bit ever since, and that would be outfielder Harrison Bader. Tell me why Harrison might be a good fit for this team.
There's the nostalgia factor that everybody loves for some reason. I would love to see Harrison Bader back. He was one of my favorite players in the late teens, early 2020s. He's got the speed still. His defense is still very much supreme. He had 10 outs above average last year in center field. And to be honest, his offense wasn't terrible. He was below average. His WRC plus was 85. He still hit 12 home runs. He had 17 stolen bases. He hit 236. Like, for a platoon center fielder who's familiar with the organization, that's pretty important, especially someone who was a part of an era where he was supposed to be the next core for the team. And to have him come back and help this next core develop, I think that could be huge for everybody involved.
Yeah, and in the same way that, Matt Carpenter was brought back last year, it's a guy that, they're very familiar with, as you mentioned. So it makes a lot of sense. He can grow his hair back out and be all Harrison Bader the way he was when he was having a whole lot of fun in the Cardinals outfield and winning Gold Gloves. And yeah, it was a good time when Bader was a part of this team. And it certainly caught me off guard that day when that deal was made, like right at the deadline. I remember we were doing the whole MLB trade deadline coverage that day. And when the trade went down, I'm like, Bader. I was like, oh my gosh, Bader for who the hell is Jordan Montgomery? He hardly fit. And then obviously it ended up being a really good trade for the Cardinals.
Yeah,
One of the ones that people forget about that actually was a decent one by John Mozeliak. And, people kind of brush over that and pay attention to the negative ones more than that, but ended up being a good trade for the Redbirds. So we're going to continue with this list because the next guy on Thomas's right up here, which you can find at redbirdbranch.com, had 3 straight years of hitting 15 or more home runs, driving in 60 or more runs. He's now a free agent. We will talk about him next on Locked On Cardinals. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same-game parlays, and so much more. We've got the wrap-up of the wildcard weekend in the NFL happening tonight. Vikings and Rams in Arizona due to the catastrophic fires that are going on in California, which has just been awful to see. Vikings favored by 2.5 tonight. Next week in the divisional round matchups, the Texans will be at the Chiefs. KC 7.5-point favorites right now. Commanders at Lions. Detroit 8.5-point favorites. Ravens at Bills. This one caught me off guard a little bit. Ravens at Bills. Ravens 1.5-point favorites in Buffalo. A little bit surprising. And then whomever wins tonight's game between the Vikings and the Rams will play the Eagles, who sadly bounced my Packers yesterday. That was a brutal game. But you can make it more fun by visiting FanDuel.com. Join today. Get started with $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Thank you again for making Locked On Cardinals your first listen every day. You can leave your comments on YouTube as well as on Twitter X anytime you want. Your feedback is always welcome and encouraged. Our guy Thomas Gobain joining us from redbirdrants.com. Make sure you give him a follow on Twitter X as well at Thomas Gobain. Right-handed hitting depth pieces that the Cardinals should look at, in your opinion, is what we're talking about today. That's our topic of discussion. We already talked about Harrison Bader, as we like to call him, Darth Bader. Next on your list, though, Thomas, is a guy who I mentioned 3 strong years between 2021 and 2023. Last year, things plummeted for him. He's a free agent. Outfielder Austin Hayes. What can you tell us about Austin and why he would fit with what the Cardinals are doing?
Yeah, so the downside to Hayes is that his walk rate got much worse last year and his strikeout rate escalated a little bit. He was not tendered a contract by the Phillies at the deadline in November, so he became a free agent. He was one of the names, like everybody came out with top 10 non-tendered guys. Austin Hayes was probably near the top of most of those lists. He's only 29. I can't imagine he'll get a 3-4 year multi-year deal just because of his struggles last year. However, like you said, 2021 through 2023, he had an OPS plus of 109, and he hit 15 home runs each of those years. Like, there's a legitimate profile in there for a real outfielder. I think he'd be a great 4th outfielder. He could feasibly play center, but he's primarily in the corners. I think the idea is that if he's playing in the corner outfield, Newpar would then move over to center. That seems to be the team's preference. Michael Ciani would be relegated to the bench. The issue with this is that Austin Hayes would probably block Alec Burleson. I know they bat different-handed, and Burley can play first base and DH, but this would take 100 at-bats away from Burleson in the outfield if they do sign Austin Hayes. But he's a great 4th outfielder, I think.
Yeah, Alec Burleson's a curious case because, you see a guy who, led the team in home runs last year and was obviously in his second full year in the big leagues, kind of a breakout star for the Cardinals. But at the same time, his struggles against left-handers was evident. I mean, he crushed righties. That was something that he did the entire season, but the lefties really had a lot of trouble with him. And, when you got a guy that can hit 20, 25 home runs or something, you don't really want to use him in a role where, he's rotating with people. But at the same time, if you can't hit lefties, what are you going to do? Like, what's the point in having you in the lineup? And he's also a guy, like you mentioned, that is kind of a guy without a real position because you can stick him in the outfield, but not that good. First base, we're still not sure what him and Contreras can do together at first base. DH seems like a nice spot for him. But again, if you can't hit lefties, you got to be on the bench for that stuff. So, as weird as it is, it makes sense to kind of take those at-bats away from him if he's going to be as dreadful against lefties as he was last year. So makes sense. That one makes sense. How about another outfielder? We'll stick with the theme here. Another name here is a guy that I remember mostly from his time with the Oakland A's. Seemed like a guy that was going to be one of those, like the A's, they always seem to churn out some young up-and-comers, and eventually they get shipped off to somebody else. But he had a really strong 2019 season where he hit 24 home runs. He drove in 67 RBIs. He had a really good, and I always talk about this, like he looked like a good ball player, just like his build and everything. 123 games that year in 2019, has never played more than that. Since that point, he did have a suspension in 2021 for the PEDs where he missed 80 games, but he's been with the A's, he's been with the Guardians, he's been with the Braves, obviously Guardians and Braves, some pretty good franchises right there, and had some decent numbers last year with Atlanta. Tell me about Ramon Laureano.
I'm glad you mentioned that bit about him being with the A's because that's what I think of too when I think of Laureano. In fact, I really didn't have much of a clue that he played Cleveland and Atlanta until I did some deeper research on him. But I do remember he was a center fielder for the A's, and he had that great year in 2019. So he put it all together there. Last year, he struggled with the Guardians so much so that they released him after just 31 games. He went over to the Braves, and he really went off there. He had a 296, 327, 505 line with them. He hit 10 home runs in just 225 plate appearances. So he did really well in the limited time that he was there. I don't know if that's enough to propel him to a multi-year deal. We could come in and snag him. He's only 30, 31, I think. So we could come in and snag him on a 1-year prove it type deal, and then he could turn that into something 2 or 3 years next offseason. I wouldn't expect amazing results on either end of the ball, offensive or defensive, but he fits the bill. He can come in, he'll be serviceable, and he'll get you some good at-bats, especially against lefties.
Now, when we talk about the outfielders, because I've mentioned multiple times this offseason where, there's not a lot of room on the roster to add these pieces. And you think about, whether if a trade finally goes down with Arenado, then Donovan would probably be your second baseman. But if it doesn't happen, then I guess we're starting Donnie in left and Lars in center and then Walker in right, which means you still got Ciani. You mentioned Burleson, Victor Scott. I guess he begins down at AAA is what we're talking about. So when we talk about these guys, and you'll keep mentioning like, hey, this isn't like some superstar. That's the idea, though, is that we're not trying to find somebody who's a superstar. You're, in fact, doing something that is very odd for Cardinals fans this year, and that's where we're finding guys that could fill a role and maybe flip them at the trade deadline this year, guys that might be useful to other players, which is why when you see the Austin Hayes and the Laureanos, where that's what happened to them last year. They went from Baltimore to the Phillies, and then, of course, Laureano going from Cleveland over to Atlanta. These are guys that they have something to offer, but they don't have to be everyday players. So, and that's kind of where we're fitting these guys in because the 40-man roster for the Cardinals, I think, is at 39 right now. So not a ton of wiggle room to go around. Matt Koperniak is a guy that, that could be a bench bat as well. So there's not a ton of wiggle room here. So when we go through these names and you're going to have fans who are like, who are these guys? Like, what are you kidding me? Well, these are the kind of guys you need on a team and on your bench that can help you out in different situations down the road. They're not going to be superstars, which is not what the Cardinals are interested in right now. So keep that in mind as we move forward on this list. We're going to go into an infielder and a utility guy. We'll continue this list of names with Thomas Govain from RedbirdRanch.com next on Locked On Cardinals. Thank you again for making Locked On Cardinals your first listen today. For your second listen, we encourage you to find Locked On MLB. Our baseball guru, Sully, brings you a daily blend of humor and baseball, keeping you updated on all of the teams during this offseason, including the Cardinals and the rest of the NL Central. You can find Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Again, RedbirdRants.com is where you can find Thomas Govan's work. You can follow him at Thomas Govain on Twitter X. Next on your list, an infielder. This is something where, again, the Cardinals got a lot of guys who can play infield, but, there's going to be situations where you need a guy like, how the team had a Matt Carpenter and a Brandon Crawford the last year. There's a spot for people like that. This is a guy that the Cardinals actually had a little bit of interest in last year. We brought him up sometimes during the offseason. He ended up basically doing a tour in the NL West last year, which has basically been his career. But last year, he went with the Giants. He was with the Dodgers. He ended up with the Padres. He spent 10 years in Arizona. Nick Ahmed, how does he fit into what the Cardinals might need in 2025, Thomas?
Yeah, and you talked about it. I think it's important to mention, like, these people are the 26th man on the roster. They're not taking spots away from Thomas to JC. They're not taking spots seriously away from Alec Burleson. Like, those guys are going to get their reps. They'll be fine. There's 26 men. We need them to come in for a pinch. We need their veteran leadership. That's who these guys would be. And that's what Ahmed would be as well.
And injuries happen, guys. I know we always begin the offseason thinking everybody's going to play 162 straight games and everybody's going to be fine. And it doesn't happen. It never happens. I mean, you've seen it with Lars Nootbaar over the years. The things happen. We had the elbow injury with Donovan and how big, like, all of a sudden you're like, all right, who's going to play left, second, third? Like, who's going to do all this stuff? You need these type of guys. Nick Ahmed makes some sense.
Yeah, and so he'd be the backup infielder, primarily at shortstop. I know the club is comfortable with JC. They gave him a lot of run at shortstop last year in the minors, but Ahmed is a proven, legitimate defensive shortstop. He's not going to blow anybody away offensively. He's never even been league average, according to weighted runs created plus, but he's been exceptional defensively. He has 118 outs above average, 79 defensive runs saved at shortstop alone. He would just come in, give Mason Wynn 5 to 10 games off a year. He could spell at second base or third base if injuries pop up, or if Nolan Norman's striking out too much, or if JC's going through a rough stretch. Like, he can fill in for those guys for 200 plate appearances in a year. Like, that's all he would be. And his defense gives him a very nice, solid floor.
Yeah, kind of think of him in a way of how Siani was supposed to be last year when you came into the season, where Siani, like, if he had made the roster, which, he was kind of on the bubble when the season, when spring training was going on, but ended up being his real role for Michael Siani should be a defensive outfielder coming off the bench. He really doesn't need to be starting because of his issues with the offense. Cardinals needed him to be that guy last year. And he flashed the glove, but obviously people had some issues with him offensively. But you think about late inning games when you start moving people around to close things out. Maybe you got a 2-run lead. And I mean, do you want, Gorman out there and Alec Burleson still out there in the field and stuff? Or would you rather would you rather bring in somebody who's like an Ahmed or a Siani and stuff like that to kind of close things out? So these are the types of situations where he would be useful. Another guy on your list, we know the Cardinals like their flexibility. They like guys who can play in different positions, which is never a bad thing. It's actually smart to do that. It's a guy who spent a lot of his time out in the NL West. I remember him mostly as a Rocky, but he was also in Miami in 23 with the Royals last year. Utility guy, Garrett Hampson. What can you tell us about Garrett and his fit with the Cardinals if they were to go out and sign him?
Yeah, I'm in the Kansas City area, so I saw Hampson play quite a bit last year. And once again, you're signing him for defensive purposes. He had a 230, 275, 300 line last year. He only had 14 extra base hits. It was very limited time. He just barely hit 200 plate appearances. But that you're signing him for defense. He's a plus defender literally everywhere. And like 8 of the 9 positions on the field, he can play in a positive way. He's a poor man's Brendan Donovan, Tommy Edman combo. That's what he would be. So while Donovan, if Arenado's traded, Donovan becomes full-time starter at one spot. Hampson can then fill in behind him as a full utility guy wherever we might need him. He can play center, he can play shortstop, second base, third base, corner outfield, wherever it is. You can trust him to have a good glove out there, and that's why we bring him on.
And if memory serves, I feel like he's a decent like base runner too. Like I feel like he's got some speed. Am I wrong there? I feel like I remember him being like a decent stolen base guy in fantasy a couple of years ago.
He 17 stolen bases in 21, 12 in 2022. I don't know what his sprint speed would be. I can look that up really quickly, see where he is.
Yeah, that's where I remember his name from when he was in Colorado. I was like, ooh, because obviously you're always trying to pick up Colorado guys for offensive purposes. I remember him stealing some bases back then. I was like, ooh, Hampson was on a run there for a little bit.
Yeah, he's in the 99th percentile in sprint speed. So that'd be nice too. We need to steal more bases. We have not been doing that since these new rules. And Mason Witt needs to hit 15 stolen bases. Garrett Hampson needs just run, please. We have nothing else to do this year. Just run.
Yeah. I'm always about that, like just creating stuff, creating chances for run. Like, you see if everybody does it against the Cardinals when we go out there, they're running all over us. And it's like, why don't we do that? They've actually made this sport easier to do this. You should be doing more of it and taking more chances and pushing the envelope a little bit. So, that's a guy. Hampson was a guy that I just remembered him being quick. And, that's something this team could use. You can never have enough speed. And if there's a situation where if you're not going to hit the home runs that you think you're going to hit playing in a ballpark like Busch Stadium, how else are you creating offense? And stealing bases is obviously a way that the league wants you to do that. And it's something that fans love. And, you still get Cardinals fans talking about the 80s and how wonderful it was to watch these guys running around and stealing second and third and bunting and doing. They would go crazy over that. If you want them to embrace some of these young guys, if you started playing ball like that again, the old school Whitey ball, I feel like the St. Louis Cardinal fan base would be all over it. I feel like they'd rather watch that than watch, the McGuire years where it was just home run after home run. I feel like, there was more winning when they were still
a lot more success.
Yeah, more pitching, more defense, more speed, power schmower, whatever way you got to do it to create the runs, we're in for it. And that's what the Cardinals fans want to see. So you can find that whole list once again at redbirdrants.com. What are some other stories that you've been working on? I know you had something about Lars Nootbaar recently. What else you got going on?
Yeah, so the Lars Nootbaar piece started, Brandon Kiley tweeted out that he has been almost as valuable as Rosarina and Adolis Garcia in the last 3 years, but people won't give him the credit the way they do those other two guys. I really want Liberatore to stay in the bullpen, so I wrote something up about that. And then I'm starting to dabble in like Cardinals history stuff, so I'm getting a few more pieces out about that.
Give me something on Terry Pendleton. I feel like people forget he was a Cardinal and how good he was over at third base before he went up and had all that success with the Braves and won an MVP. Started with the Cardinals. That was one hell of an infield they had back then. But anyway, check out all of Thomas's work. He's continuously writing daily. We don't have any transactions to tell you about with the Cardinals. So this is what we do. We discuss options that maybe they could look into down the road as we get closer and closer to spring training. Again, we're only a month out, you guys. It's going to be really, really fast. And then we're right back at it with a full schedule here at Locked On Cardinals. So, Thomas, appreciate you as always. And we'll talk to you real soon. Okay, man?
All right. Stay warm out there.
Thank you again for making Locked On Cardinals your first listen every day. If you haven't already, give us a follow on Twitter, X, at @LO_Cardinals and at JD Sports Radio. You can like and subscribe on YouTube and help our channel and love for the Cardinals grow. You guys are the best fans in baseball for a reason. We will see you next time on Locked On Cardinals.